Cabbage Patch Kids are one of the most iconic toys of the 80s. They're known for their big bulbous heads, soft bodies, chubby little cheeks, among other riot-inducing features. Oh, yeah, there were riots for these things during Black Friday in the 80s, which is probably one of the other things that they're most known for. While that certainly is an interesting detail that we will revisit later on, I feel like the infamous riots often overshadow the rest of the Cabbage Patch lore that's out there. Like, have you ever wondered about the origin of the Cabbage Patch Kids? And I don't just mean historically, I mean their origin, like birth. Not like the birth of the idea, but like cabbage. These things are canonically, medically birthed out of cabbages. Did you know that? Maybe that particular part is pretty well known since it's kind of in the name or whatever, but in addition to the extensive Mother Cabbage birthing process, the lore here runs pretty deep, and I personally find it much more fascinating and much weirder than a few crazed parents buying dolls during the holidays. My point being, the Cabbage Patch Kids story didn't start with the Black Friday riots, and it certainly didn't end there either. And the birth of the idea also didn't start with Xavier Roberts, the recognized inventor of Cabbage Patch Kids, whose signature is printed on the backside of every doll, but another doll maker entirely. Martha Nelson Thomas first created her original doll babies in the 1970s, which were handmade, soft-sculpted, individually unique, and came with their own set of important papers detailing their name and personalities. In 1977, Xavier Roberts, who was 21 at the time, came across the doll babies at a craft fair and became inspired to buy Martha's dolls and sell them himself for a profit. Martha was uncomfortable with his association to her art. She was worried he'd not just take the idea for himself, but would also tarnish it by commodifying it and turning it into a product instead of an individual piece that each has its own story. But asking Xavier to stop buying and reselling the doll babies didn't exactly stop him. Xavier directly wrote in a letter to Martha that he would carry your type of dolls, either made by you or someone else. And that someone else would be him, soon after creating a line of his own dolls called Little People. And coincidentally, Little People were virtually the same as Martha's doll babies, soft-sculpted, individually unique, and supplied with adoption papers, though not totally the same because these dolls were birthed out of cabbages. As the official legend goes, in the Appalachian Mountains of North Georgia, a little boy named Xavier Roberts saw a bunny bee, a tiny flying rabbit, and chased it all the way to a waterfall. Behind the waterfall was a cave that led to a cabbage patch filled with a bunch of tiny little baby heads, pollinated by the bunny bees with magic crystal dust, and delivered by Colonel Casey the stork. Xavier promised the Cabbage Patch Kids that he'd build an adoption center for them to stay in so they could all find loving homes. It's a pretty accurate depiction of the story if you just replace the cabbage patch he stumbled across with craft fair and the bunny bee that led him there with self-serving greed. Close enough. Martha did file a lawsuit against Xavier, not just for copyright infringement and the blatant theft of her idea, but for the infringement on something she deeply cared about. She saw the doll babies as not just her art, but as the embodiment of real children and an extension of herself. Though, because she saw her dolls as babies, she never signed them or copyrighted their design, which led to the lawsuit settling out of court in Xavier's favor. And with Xavier's name printed right where you can't miss it, Martha's involuntary involvement and due credit are to this day rarely mentioned. And so, Xavier was free to continue his Little People doll line, sold out of the adoption center built from his story, named Babyland General Hospital. Excuse me, not sold. And they weren't dolls, they were babies that were adopted, complete with official paperwork and an oath of parenthood. It's an important distinction that's taken very seriously.
Where are these little people made?
They're not made, I'm sorry, they are delivered from a cabbage patch. The cabbage patch is located far in the North Georgia mountains, and I can't reveal where it's located exactly.
You don't say made?
No.
The Babyland General Hospital also wasn't just called a hospital. For all intents and purposes, it was a fully fledged medical center, just for soft sculpted babies, full of doctors and nurses, checkups and deliveries, and even triage for babies that needed a little extra TLC. I don't know what I was expecting to come out of that ambulance, but that little peanut-headed baby flopped over onto the stretcher.
Hi.
It's not it. TLC, of course, being not just tender love and care, but Babyland's #1 prescription alongside imagicillin to treat any and all ailments that a baby could have. When a Mother Cabbage goes into labor, the Babyland medical staff are there to assist, performing ultrasounds, administering drugs, checking that she's dilated 10 leaves, and retrieving the baby, dangling it upside down by the ankle and giving it a few spanks as per standard procedure. Not that different from a real hospital, really. Canonically, outside factors can also contribute to the features of each baby. The gender is determined by the bunny bees and their magic crystal dust, fertilizer affects whether the baby will be born with or without hair, and a cold snap in the cabbage patch can result in premature cabbage births. So, I didn't grow up in the 80s. My only encounters with Cabbage Patch Kids when I was a kid were in passing. I think I remember seeing a few buried at the bottom of someone else's toy box here and there, covered in marker, smelling like old crayons, and past their prime. So to me, this all seems a little outlandish, to put it lightly, but although I'm not the biggest fan of the dolls themselves, and the hospital is pretty weird, I actually still appreciate the commitment to the bit. A modern-day equivalent that's not so different is the Jellycat Diner experience, where toys are pretend cooked, seasoned, topped, and packaged to make it feel like a real food ordering experience. Would I personally spend time waiting in line just to buy a $40 stuffed hot dog? Probably not, but that doesn't mean it's not fun. And the same goes for the Babyland Hospital. It's just a matter of different toys and treatments, but it's all a marketing gimmick. And just like I assume, everyone visiting the Jellycat Diner knows that the toys aren't real food. Most Cabbage Patch Kid parents don't actually believe that their doll is alive, but are just partaking in the fun, which is harmless. After a few years of creating the handmade little people into the 80s, with prices that could reach the hundreds, by the way, there was clearly enough of a market for Xavier to take things commercial. In 1982, Xavier's dolls were renamed Cabbage Patch Kids and licensed to Coleco for mass production. Along with the name change also came a redesign of the commercial dolls and their branding. They had the same soft bodies but were factory made instead of hand stitched, while their heads were made of vinyl. These new dolls also came at a much cheaper price, averaging around $25 per kid. Even if you didn't buy into the whole "these are 100% real magical babies" aspect, the uniqueness of each doll that the cabbage birthing supplemented was still the main marketing tactic. Though less unique than their handmade counterparts, a typical commercial Cabbage Patch Kid had its own distinct name, or two names, unlike any other, and printed on its birth certificate to make it all official. An equally as official adoption application form was also packaged with the dolls that could be mailed in to receive an even officialer adoption certificate. With a special record and name for each doll, buying a Cabbage Patch Kid wasn't just buying into a fad where you got the same toy as everyone else, but an individual adoption experience, personalized just for you. This essentially made every doll into a limited edition collectible, even as they were being mass-produced. And like with plenty of other fads, from Beanie Babies to Labubu's, the collectability derived from their unique variants and scarcity is the main part of their appeal. The initial wave of interest comes from people who just like the product, and the following waves are from people who like it because it's popular. The original Little People saw hundreds of thousands of sales before their mass production, but it was still a relatively niche market, especially considering the price. Cabbage Patch Kids, though, were a different beast entirely, produced and advertised on a much larger scale, and producing much more demand, and so ensued the riots. By 1983, the Cabbage Patch fad was in full swing, but Coleco hadn't anticipated just how popular they would be, underestimating sales, underproducing, and underdelivering. Riots is more or less an umbrella term to describe the chaos throughout the 1983 holiday season caused by how difficult it was to get your hands on a doll when everyone had to have one. During Black Friday especially, which used to be the US's premier sale-seeking sporting event for shoppers in the market for a good deal, Cabbage Patch Kids were the most sought-after item. Customers lined up for hours, swarmed sales floors, trashed product displays, and targeted any and everyone that stood in their way with shoving, punching, and trampling. All in the name of having a little Norval Eldon of their own. One of the most infamous incidents in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, included over 1,000 shoppers, multiple reported broken bones, and a store manager throwing dolls from behind the counter into the crowd while swinging a baseball bat to fend off the rest of the mob. There are plenty of videos that cover the events more in depth, but you probably get the gist. Shit was crazy. Not every store had riots, but those that did successfully stirred up even more commotion and demand for the dolls, with all the news coverage and headlines, which further boosted their sales and popularity. Coleco ramped up production following the Black Friday frenzies, and by 1984 had sold upwards of 3 million Cabbage Patch Kids, and that was only the beginning. While the shortages had mostly been resolved, there was still high demand throughout the mid-80s. More demand means even more supply, and more supply means not just more dolls, but more accessories, toys, clothes, merchandise, more cabbage chaos. Generally, the business model of a doll line doesn't start and end with the toy itself. The doll is merely the entry point that's then used to sell additional pieces to enhance the experience. The base game, the expansion packs, and Xavier Roberts, the EA of his time. That's just a little Sims joke, but the point is that the brand was expanding beyond just the dolls. Ceramic figurines, PVC figurines, posable figurines, figurines with playsets, accessory sets from smaller toys like bottles, diapers, and play food, to larger scale items like carriers, beds, strollers, washing machines, the normal stuff. And what fun was a doll if you couldn't dress it up? Cabbage Patch clothes didn't just come in regular boring baby outfits, though they did have plenty of those too. You could dress up your little Francesca Marie in anything from sportswear to fur coats to cowboy costumes, or you could make your own clothes from officially licensed patterns. While accessories and clothes are great on their own, you could really get the best of both worlds by adopting a specially themed Cabbage Patch Kid variant that had it all. Watch as your Clarence Peabody saddles up on a horse as a show pony kid, performs as a clown with the circus kids, or visits far-off lands like Scotland or Russia as a world traveler. Your precious little Julie Goop can also upgrade from a yarn head to a corn silk kid, indulge in the upper class as a couture kid, rep the MLB as an all-star, or become a young astronaut and take a ride in the US space shuttle. They actually sent a Cabbage Patch Kid to space in 1986. With so many options, the possibilities are endless, and the world isn't just your oyster, it's your Cabbage Patch. Other variants with less exaggerated themes included twins, if you wanted your baby to have a friend that looked just like them, porcelain-faced dolls aimed towards collectors, and premature babies, or preemies, which garnered some controversy for turning a very real and often serious medical complication into a commodity. But at least preemies were still actual humans, as opposed to kusas, the cat-dog-human hybrid babies that just don't quite sit right with me. I'll admit, some of them aren't too bad, and I can definitely see what they were going for. Kids like dolls and stuffed animals, so why not combine the two?
Oh my god.
This is why. The pudgy, tucked-in smiles honestly kind of work better for animal faces than the regular kids, in my opinion, but it's the eyes. And they have animal ears and tails, but since they have the typical head of yarn hair, are they otherwise hairless? I feel like these things could benefit from something soft and fuzzy to distract from the way they are. These creatures also came with their own separate backstory and lore, and have a special ability to bring their owners good luck. All of these different kinds of Cabbage Patch Kids might seem like a lot, but this isn't even an exhaustive list, and only covers up to 1986. Not to mention that while the mass-produced kids were joining the circus and being launched into space, the original soft sculptured kids were also still being crafted and sold out of Babyland General in Georgia. And of course the handmade kids couldn't go without their own themes too, including special edition dolls designed to represent Christmas, Sleeping Beauty, Tom Sawyer, and Daddy's Darlings, whatever that means. And there were also plenty of other products if you still needed even more cabbage content aside from the dolls themselves. If it can be bought, it can be found as licensed Cabbage Patch merch. Stickers, watches, board games, lunchboxes, bath sets, and radios. You could have the dolls printed on your bed sheets. Eat doll face shaped cereal in the morning. Talk about the dolls on your doll shaped phone. Throw your own Cabbage Patch Kid birthday party, from the party favors all the way down to the cake, baked specifically in the shape of a premature baby. As the brand continued to expand, the backstory was expanding too, just to keep things interesting. New lore dropped in the form of a few storybooks, an animated TV special, and a studio album. The album, which was released on cassette and vinyl that you could play on your branded Cabbage Patch Kids record player, told a story through its 10 songs, each with a different theme. Some of them are just kind of Cabbage Patch hype songs, but others are sung or spoken by particular characters to flesh out the narrative, as much as songs on a cheap cash grab record are able to. Villains 3 introduces new villains, 3 of them. Lavender McDade, an evil old lady that wants the Cabbage Patch Kids to mine gold for her, Bo Weasel, a weasel that also likes gold, and Cabbage Jack, a jackrabbit that loves cabbages but hates when they turn into kids, because then he can't eat them no more. Otis Lee introduces the protagonist kid, Otis Lee, who goes missing along with 2 other kids in the next song, Happy Birthday Throwdown. A Way to Get Back Home describes the 2 missing kids being put to work mining gold, and in Run Run Run, Otis Lee saves his friends with the help of the bunny bees, and they all live happily ever after. With all of that established, the storybooks detail similar adventures where someone or something goes missing, or the villains 3 are up to something evil, and the Cabbage Patch Kids save the day in the end. It's pretty standard kids story stuff, not all that interesting, but the books do include a map of the Cabbage Land? I don't know, it doesn't have an official name. And this incredible illustration of a baby working in the gold mines. Gotta start 'em young, I guess. The villains also made an appearance in the animated TV special, The Cabbage Patch Kids' First Christmas, that aired in 1984. They didn't, however, appear in either of the early 80s video games, Adventures in the Park and Picture Show. Both of these were made for Coleco's own home console, ColecoVision, and as with many early video games, there wasn't a whole lot to them visually, but even for the standard at the time, the gameplay was also a bit basic. Adventures in the Park features a sort of endless runner of stages, playing through 9 different screens each round that get a little harder as you play, but that are still pretty much the same every time. Picture Show was a paint and animation studio where you can design different areas by drawing or stamping and record your little Cabbage Patch Kid moving through the scenes. This was essentially just a reskin of another Coleco game, Smurf's Paint and Play Workshop, which I feel is also indicative of how much care, or lack thereof, went into it. Like I said before, if it could be sold as licensed merchandise, Cabbage Patch Kids was selling it. Along with Coleco, Xavier Roberts himself was also busy in the mid-80s, not just with the dolls, but with country bears and lawsuits. That's lawsuits plural, even excluding Martha Nelson Thomas's legal action that settled in 1986. The Country Bears were a new toy line created by Xavier, and seemingly his own original idea this time, called Furskins, similar to Cabbage Patch Kids only through the Xavier Roberts signatures on their feet. The Furskins are a collection of recurring characters with distinct names and personalities, dressed in proper Appalachian attire and doing honest country living work work, like baking pies, delivering mail, and beekeeping. And I unfortunately find them really cute. They have just the right amount of kitschy 80s jank, and I'm such a sucker for country theming like this. Look at their little outfits. They got boots on. While the Furskins were popular because of Xavier's namesake and reputation, they never reached the same heights as Cabbage Patch Kids. As for the lawsuits, in 1985, an infamous parody of Cabbage Patch Kids named Garbage Pail Kids released in the form of trading cards. Each card featured a kid that closely resembled a Cabbage Patch Kid in some kind of gross or disturbing scenario. Their names were themed around their abnormalities, with the intention of being a direct antithesis to the original dolls that were born from magical crystals and flying bunnies. Just a year after the cards were introduced, Xavier Roberts sued Topps, the company behind them, for $30 million, claiming copyright infringement. Kind of rich that the guy who originally got sued for copyright infringement for ripping off the likeness of Cabbage Patch Kids to begin with was now upset with someone else for doing the exact same thing. Funny how that works. Topps eventually settled for $7 million with the right to continue making the cards as long as they changed their features up a little bit. But by then, they'd already produced an entire live-action movie, which has a 0% Rotten Tomatoes score, and the cards had pretty much already run their course. But Xavier wasn't done with the courts yet, as he was then sued by SNNC, the company behind not just the licensing of Cabbage Patch Kids, but also their modern branding and Bunny Bee-filled backstory. SNNC claimed that Xavier never paid their share of the $7 million Topps suit, and that by making the Furskins, he was in violation of their exclusive licensing contract. There was a lot of back and forth, but it ultimately ended with SNNC receiving a settlement and Coleco going bankrupt 6 months later. But however much money Xavier had to pay up, it was apparently barely a drop in the bucket, and Cabbage Patch Kids persisted, simply changing toy brands and licensing with Hasbro in 1988, while Coleco went out of business entirely. The first ever talking Cabbage Patch Kids, called Talking Kids, were released in 1987, and though it was pre-Hasbro and pre-90s, this is the beginning of the 90s era, or what I like to call the Gimmick Era. It was apparently no longer exciting enough for a doll to just have a unique name and adoption certificate, or come with fancy clothes. The new Cabbage Patch editions throughout the 90s all had to do something. The Talking Kids were not an especially new concept for dolls in general, but it was a step in a new direction for Cabbage Patch, similar to the Growing Hair Kids, which were also centered around their novelty feature, aka their growing hair. And from there on, the gimmicks just kept on coming. Pretty Crimp and Curl Kids were another hair-based doll that had stylable yarn, and even more Talking Kids came along too, like the Talkin' Farm Babies and the Babblin' Fun Baby. Speaking of babies, if you wanted a real immersive baby experience, there was Baby Cries So Real that cried watery tears for you to wipe away. A baby with a heartbeat, a baby with a pacifier, a baby with a heart monitor. Meanwhile, other kids could have their faces painted, celebrate a birthday by using a noisemaker or kazoo, tan and change color in the sun, give you kisses when they were squeezed, or chew your hair off. Yeah, I guess trying to innovate with new, exciting Cabbage Patch Kids didn't always turn out so well. The 1996 Snack Time Kid had a super cool moving mouth that really eats, but unfortunately it was hungry for not just the plastic snacks it was packaged with, but anything else that kids would stick in it. A few incidents where fingers and hair got caught in the metal roller mechanism inside the doll eventually led to it being taken out of production, but that didn't mean that another snack-eating doll couldn't come along to replace it just a couple years later, now with the hair-hungry chomping replaced by moving arms and a rotating head, for safety. With all of these different physical and tech-based additions, there was a clear effort being made to reignite that initial wave of chaos and sold-out inventory. Though, despite these efforts, the doll's popularity never quite reached 1983 levels again. But that's not to say that Cabbage Patch Kids had entirely run their course, either. The new dolls, gimmicky as they were still selling, and the brand was still profitable, further demonstrated by not just the stream of new toys, but brand deals and partnerships and a new video series. A McDonald's Happy Meal toy promotion ran in the early 90s, which is often a good indicator for if a toy brand has really made it big time. Though a measly McDonald's collab was nothing compared to a partnership with the Olympics. During the 1992 Summer Games, Cabbage Patch Kids were named the first official mascot of the US Olympic team, newly decorated in Olympic uniforms and taken along to the games. 2,500 limited edition dolls were given out to kids in Barcelona, and when their mascot status was renewed for the 1996 Games, a new line of Olympic Kids were sold in stores. The new video series in the 90s was stop-motion animated instead of cartoon animated, and established even more recurring characters and lore, though the stories weren't quite as magical and adventurous as before in the books, but took a more slice-of-life, sitcom-y approach, as was par for the course in the 90s. The kids go to school, navigate crushes, sporadically break into song, etc., etc., the usual stuff. While it's true that I'm not the biggest fan of the Cabbage Patch dolls themselves, I have to admit that the show is actually pretty charming and well done. The kids' voice actors honestly do a lot of the heavy lifting, but there was clearly a lot of style and effort put into it, even though it only amounted to 5 straight-to-home video episodes. And plenty of dolls, modeled after the characters from the show, of course. Into the 2000s appropriately kicked off with a limited edition Millennium Celebration Y2K baby. There was, of course, still a non-stop flow of even more gimmick-based dolls. Color-changing hair, glow-in-the-dark hair, hair you can pretend to cut, really a lot of hair-based stuff. One non-hair-based doll, though, was the Cuddle and Care baby, which might just seem like yet another fat-faced baby, but what set it apart from the rest was the CD-ROM game that was included with it. This actually wasn't the first Cabbage Patch Kid to offer additional play on the computer. There was a series of e-adoption kids that could be adopted online using a secret code, which is pretty reminiscent of the Webkinz format, though it predates it by 6 years. As much as I looked though, I couldn't find any actual footage of the website and the adoptions. The Wayback Machine only got me as far as the sign-up screen, but I really wanted to see it. Judging by the advertising on the box, I have to assume it was more of a virtual scrapbook-style journal or family album with info and pictures instead of games like Webkinz. But still, this was a neat idea for 1999, and I was surprised I'd never even heard of it before. But I think that's because it didn't exactly take off and is now lost media. The Cuddle and Care doll, by comparison, focused on the baby care rather than the adoption aspect, and had mini-games like mixing food or decorating a bib. Even though the standard in 2000, when this came out, wasn't especially high for licensed CD-ROM games, let alone girly games, this gameplay really seems one-dimensional, considering it was one of the main selling points of the toy. But it's made for kids, and I'm looking at it with a retrospective bias, so I'm sure no one really cared that much. And the video games didn't stop there. Hatch Puppy Rescue released for the Game Boy Advance based on, would you believe it, another new Cabbage Patch toy, Patch Puppies, which are pretty reminiscent of the first skins, but I'll say it, with a lot less charm. Though they are leagues better than the Kusas and the Cabbage Patch Pets, which were accessory dogs and cats. Anyway, the Game Boy Advance game was a platformer where you play as a kid rescuing dogs across the map, and according to most long plays that are uploaded, offers about 30 minutes of total gameplay. And maybe you could stretch that to an hour if you were a dumb little kid that didn't play so good. Not exactly thrilling. Another CD-ROM game, Where's My Pony, released a few years later, and had a 3D rendered point-and-click style that may not have also been very riveting, but it did have ponies, so that's gotta count for something. I normally like to try out games like this that I mention in the video for myself, but I don't think there's much to these games that can't be gained from looking at like 30 seconds of gameplay. And I've played plenty of shovelware, made-for-kids, and bad licensed franchise games, but even by my standards, these look so bad. Near the end of the decade in 2008, Cabbage Patch Kids celebrated their 25th anniversary, which was of course commemorated with special anniversary edition dolls. And also in 2008, unrelated to the anniversary but still kinda weird, the 2008 US presidential election candidates all received their own custom Cabbage Patch Kids made in their likeness, for some reason. This actually wasn't the first or the last time this happened either, with George W. Bush and John Kerry, and later Mitt Romney, Obama 2.0, and Michelle Obama dolls released for the respective 2004 and 2012 elections. And the celebrity Cabbage Patch Kids didn't end there, though these were maybe some of the weirdest choices of celebrity to model them after, considering it's a brand that primarily appeals to kids. I don't know, I'm sure there are plenty of kids who would love to play with a George Bush doll. Though the lookalikes were typically made one of a kind as promotional items and weren't sold in stores. Other celebrity dolls included Ellen DeGeneres, Oprah, Elvis, Steven Tyler, Raven-Symoné, eventually even JoJo Siwa. And look, I've completely avoided this comparison all the way up until this point, but can I just say that when they try to make these things look like real people, they're skirting the Chucky resemblance line a little too closely. While you couldn't exactly go out and buy an Oprah Cabbage Patch Kid from the store, unfortunately, there were still even more celebrity dolls to come, including the 2009 NASCAR line, with drivers like Jeff Gordon and Dale Earnhardt Jr. made into more doughy likenesses. Also in 2009, Babyland General Hospital was moved to a new permanent location in Georgia, shifting the brand into its modern era. This upgrade offered tons of additional space for cabbage statues in the yard, a mini museum in the lobby, a widespread toy store, adoption floor that had all the variant babies you could think of, and keeping with the tradition, the staff to this day still dress in medical scrubs, though the vibe is a lot more commercial than clinical. But don't worry, there are still nurseries, a maternity ward, and the Magic Crystal Tree, where you can view public live births from Mother Cabbage for free. Cabbage births, as we know, have been around since Cabbage Patch Kids were still called little people, but as far as I can tell, the spectacle of watching a birth happen live is something new to this updated location. Again, I can appreciate the theatrics of it all, but we can all agree it's a little weird, right? Especially the cabbage heads all scattered around, poking out of rocks and leaves that occasionally move a little. I don't like when they move. The Baby So Real doll of 2017 is a more modern toy that, just like the Babyland heads, also moves, and also kinda scares me. Only part of it moves, though, and only technically? That part being its LCD eyes that change depending on its expression or mood. In addition to having screens for eyes, it also has glowing cheeks, voice lines, motion and touch sensors, and an accompanying app that pairs with the doll as a virtual version that reacts as you play. I don't know, doesn't that kind of defeat the whole purpose of the doll itself feeling real? I don't know, I'm not an iPad kid, I'm far behind on what's appealing to kids anymore. And I know, the older generation complaining about the modernization of kids' toys, but can we talk about how unsettling it is for a baby to have glowing eyes? Not to mention when they're glitched with static or, oh my god, when they're turned off. Look at that. You want this sitting in your toy box at night? When the eyes are functioning normally, it is a pretty innovative idea and an ideal combination between the everything must have screens mindset and fully traditional non-tech-based toys. Now in 2025, with the company's 50th anniversary just a few years away, Cabbage Patch Kids are still being birthed regularly at the Magic Crystal Tree. All kinds of gimmicky kits are sold in stores, and you can even still buy, or adopt, new one-of-a-kind soft sculpture dolls online. You know, those dolls that are marketed as a work of art that's individual and specially handcrafted, listed with AI generated backgrounds. Maybe if there wasn't such a tumultuous history involving the whole building a billion-dollar empire off of the theft of an independent artist's creation, it wouldn't be as big of a deal. I mean, I don't think anyone who's going to spend $275 on the Judy Gwenda doll is going to give a shit either. But any and all use of AI in place of real art or creativity is worth noting, especially when it's meant to be the foundation of the entire brand. Also, unrelated to the AI, but why are these two giving with their vampire eyes? That doesn't feel very festive. With all the media and toys and doll variants, from albums to pony games to cereal to Obama, we've certainly come a long way since Martha Nelson Thomas's original doll babies, and I'm not so sure that it's for the best. Most businesses are going to expand and sell out for weird partnerships or otherwise take any opportunity it can to make more money. And in general, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Maybe the world didn't necessarily need dog hybrid cabbage birth dolls or to send a Cabbage Patch Kid into space, but that's just capitalism, baby. Consumers will like what they like, and that's fine. Though all of these varying partnerships and accomplishments and awards will still never sit quite right with me or seem that impressive, knowing that they were built off of someone else's uncredited talent and hard work. The documentary Billion Dollar Babies was released in 2023, which details Xavier's winding Cabbage Patch story with all of its ups and downs, though I would like to recommend a shorter mini-doc by Vice that's based on Martha's side of the story, the side that doesn't often get mentioned, told by her friends and husband after her passing. It's linked in the description, and full disclosure, it did make me cry a little, which I did not expect at all when I originally went into making this video with the intent of just making fun of how weird looking Cabbage Patch Kids are. Although Xavier's billion-dollar business still lives on, I think it's worth shedding a little bit of light on not just Martha's part in it, but her own creativity and legacy that may be on a smaller scale, but isn't any less important. Hi, welcome to Jelly TV, where I shout out a video that I think deserves some love. I recommend watching There Will Never Be Another Wii by Romanzo. We all know the Wii, its innovation, its legacy, but if you're anything like me, you never get tired of hearing about it, especially when its history is compiled into such a neat and concise little package. Romanzo's video isn't just thorough and interesting, but it has tons of humor and charm that really make it a 10 out of 10. His channel is definitely underrated for the quality and style that you can find in all of his videos, so I definitely recommend checking out this video and the rest of his stuff. A huge thank you to Daniel E. from ABQ, Kevin Evans, Bunny, Bunzo, Karis Desarun, Chumby, Hayden Campbell, Lojua Animal, Lou, Luna Stephenson, Mark Kent, Nighttime Coral, Ollie E, Online Grandpa 1, Paper Sam, Pharmamags, Pixel Puppy, Shaples, Theodore Nicolailius, and the rest of my patrons for supporting me.